Hi, everyone. Welcome to our podcast, Tech Talk, a podcast where we talk about various technical topics related to computers and IT and anything to do with the current technological advancement and all the popular topics that people are talking about. A lot of the times, we talk with our friends or colleagues, and we don't actually know we don't have the foundational understanding of all of these upcoming topics. So we try to cover these topics in a basic way, so you can, in a social setting, you know what you're talking about to a degree. So today we decided we are going to talk about desktop and how to build a desktop from scratch. This is actually a very interesting topic for me and Amit, both of us, because we have been interested in computing for a long time, and we have both built our own desktop PCs from scratch, and it covers the hardware side of computing with the software side quite well. And nowadays, obviously, many people are working from home, and when we're working from home, it's good to have a good, powerful machine to enable us to perform better when we are using our computer. So for this reason, a lot of people have opted for investing into a good desktop PC, and for that it's good to have that knowledge on how to build it and what are the things to consider. And a lot of things actually needs to you need to know a lot of small details on how to the permutation and combination of each of the hardware, then what's the best way of building the whole PC. So I think this is a good topic for us to cover. Hopefully our audience will get a lot of benefit out of this talk, and yeah, I mean, we are also very excited to talk about it. So yeah, building a desktop from scratch. Amit, what's your thought on it?
I think it's a great topic, Rinat, especially during COVID times. A lot of us are, as you rightly said, are stuck at home, and we have been working from home for almost a year, more over a year now. We went into lockdown last March, and it's April 2021, so it's more than a year. So yes, I think working on a good machine is good. Uh, I think laptops became popular for a certain period of time because people were traveling and people were working from cafes and offices like WeWork, co-working spaces, etc. And laptops became very popular. But when you don't have to travel and you have the comforts of your home, you want to invest in a good PC, powerful PC, as you mentioned, getting rid of the laptops and having a couple of monitors so that you have more screen space. And I think it's good to have. I currently have a PC with three monitors, and then I have another laptop that's connected to two different monitors. So yes, so it's two home office, one for me and one for my wife. So yeah, it's quite important these days. Plus, I think with a PC, because it's located in one place, you can control the temperature. You can put some cooling in place, etc. With a laptop, it's very difficult to do that. You can overclock the processor, etc. So yeah, I mean, lots of fun stuff. So I think it's a good topic to cover today because in during COVID, a lot of us stuck at home working. I think it's a good thing to do.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, no, you have a really good setup, it looks like, with multiple monitors and stuff like that. I mean, I also, thought they would be good. I mean, even before the COVID started, I thought I always wanted to have a really powerful desktop setup, and I did, instead of having multiple monitors, I decided to buy a giant TV. So I bought a 51-inch curved Samsung TV and
Wow.
used that as my monitor. And yeah, I mean, the real estate I have in it's a 4K monitor, so like I can have like six screens inside my TV, and six laptop size screens. So yeah, it's important to, when we're talking about desktop, building a desktop, yeah, monitor is also, or the display device is also an important thing think about, and how the bandwidth or the processing power it will take, and how the processor will support that. That's another thing to think about. So yeah, my setup is also my. I did my setup before the COVID started, but yeah, I had always, for last 10 years I've always used laptops. But then I thought, you know what, laptop is really good to be mobile, to take your data with you wherever you go, and have the ability to do any kind of computing on the go. But there are a lot of limitation of desktop as well. I sorry, a lot of limitation of laptop. The processing power is to be to is one of the main ones. But yeah, so, and obviously during COVID times there are now more need to have, or rather than need, it's just more, it's more easier, or it is more enabling to have a desktop PC, because you're not now, there is less need to be mobile. And why not take this opportunity to have a really powerful machine to work on? So yeah, I mean, that is one of the exciting things about working from home. And yeah, I mean, so what shall we discuss? What um, shall we discuss in the beginning? Shall we discuss the individual components that goes in a desktop
Yeah,
PC?
so yes, I mean individual components. I mean anyone who's interested in building a PC, they need to
Mm-hmm.
know what a PC is and what are we talking about when we talk about building. And
Mm-hmm.
building is actually just the uh, CPU. Once you have the CPU set up, all the other accessories you connect to the CPU so that you have your PC ready. But when we talk about building, mostly we are talking about the box, the big box that has all the components and through which you connect all the peripherals like your mouse, your keyboard, your monitors, your speakers, etc.
Yes.
So yes, so whenever we let's start talking about the components. So when we start talking about any computer, we always think about the processor, and that's what dictates the overall build. So whatever you want to do, it always starts with what processor you want to use. Do you want to use an Intel processor or a AMD processor, or do you want to use Apple is currently not making any. I mean, Apple also has their own computers, which are desktop models. Um, and you can I think what's the name of the Apple version for the computer?
Mac, Apple Mac.
Apple Mac, yeah, Apple Mac. I think you can make Apple. Sorry, you cannot make Apple Macs. You cannot customize. You can customize them online, but you cannot build one of your own. It's very
Mm-hmm.
difficult to source all the parts and make one yourself. So the only thing you can work on is a Windows-based machine or a Linux-based machine. So an operating system
Yes.
that's either Windows or Linux, and then based on that you use the processor. So I mean we talked about one aspect of personal computer, which is work from home and working actually using a desktop computer. But sometimes the desktop computer is too powerful and it doesn't justify the cost with which you the cost that you incur while building it. So normally what people do is they build a PC when they want to do gaming or streaming or video editing.
Right.
These are computer intensive processes where you need a very big, a powerful processor. You need a lot of memory, and because you are using a very computer intensive process, you also need some cooling. So you will have a liquid cooled system or a air cooled system. So you'll need fans, or you'll need, if it's a water cooled system, then you will need water and pipes running along the motherboard and other components to cool the system down. So gaming is a big aspect, video editing is another aspect, and a lot of people do streaming these days on Twitch. So they play games or they're doing something, so they do streaming. So that's another aspect of using a desktop PC. So when we start building a PC, we think about the processor, AMD, Intel. So if we, the moment we decide which processor it is, we have to decide what's the type of the processor. Is it a 32-bit processor? Is it a 64-bit processor? Is it a ARM-based processor, ARM? So those are very low-powered processors that consume very less energy, and those are mostly the ones that you see on your mobile phones. So ARM-based processor are mostly on your mobile phones and tablets and even smartwatches. So what architecture is it? And once you have the processor, then you think about the motherboard. And the motherboard is like a bus, and it has got everything, all the cabling or everything is laid out, and you just have to connect the different parts. So you have the processor, you put it inside the motherboard, and then you install the RAM, then you install your hard disk, and then if you have a graphics card you install that, then any cooling, and then you have a power supply unit, and then you put it inside the cabinet in which the motherboard is housed with the fan and the hard disk, and then you connect your keyboard, mouse, monitor, and speakers. So essentially these are the components, and we can talk a bit more detail about each of them.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you covered most of the components, and to be honest, when you are building a desktop PC, how which model or which type of each of the components would go best with one another is the biggest challenge, and also it needs to be bespoke based on the things that you need. For
Yes.
example, when I was building my PC, the first question was whether I'm gonna go with Intel processor or an AMD processor. I went with AMD, and that has, that has been an interesting experience. The reason I decided AMD is because AMD you get more processing power for cheaper price.
Yes.
Because Intel is usually the sort of the leader in processing this whole coming up with new technology in within the processor, so they have to spend a lot of money on research and development, and that money obviously trickles down when you are buying the processor itself. AMD obviously kind of has and this is just a theory that I have heard from someone, that AMD has to spend less money on research because it is not sort of pioneering the technologies.
Oh, no, no, no,
Is it?
Renat. AMD is actually caught up quite a lot, especially when it comes to now gaming. So
Hmm.
I've
Right.
been watching a lot of YouTube channels, and people are now saying that AMD processors are much better than Intel processors, especially when it
Right.
comes to multi-thread computer games, etc. And AMD processors, yes, they used to be cheap because, of course, the technology was a bit behind compared to Intel,
Mhm.
but they have now caught up, and there are some applications where AMD processors are much better than Intel processors, and Intel processors are now lagging, and AMD
Oh,
is
right.
now leaders in those segments, and yeah, so AMD has caught up now, and it's still, I think, cheaper compared to Intel, of course, because
Yeah.
I think Intel is a big brand, and a lot of corporates and everyone, they tend to buy from Intel because they don't. AMD is still not that trustworthy, but that scene is changing. A lot of people are now
Right. Right.
investing in AMD.
Okay, well, for the right reasons or for the wrong reasons, I went for AMD. Because, I mean, overall, after doing some research, I realized that you could get more processing power in total for your money. And that's ultimately, the brand is less meaningful when
Yes,
you are looking for, processor. Whatever will
absolutely.
do your job better. That's the point. So I went with AMD. But one of the things that I have faced is virtual machines, creating virtual machines. So one of the things that I was gonna, one of my target to do in a like a high spec desktop computer was to have a few virtual machines that would be residing inside, and then I can do different kind of tasks in different virtual machines. And creating those virtual machines need you need to set up the processor in a way, and then you also need to make sure the BIOS settings in the motherboard is correct when So for Intel, it was actually quite easy, and the default setting allows you to do, it kind of syncs with the motherboard quite well. But with AMD, I remember after setting up the whole PC, I had to spend like a day or two just to do the enough research and enable the the virtual machine capability within the AMD processor. So, I mean, obviously you have when you buy processors, you have different cores and multi-threading and stuff. So when you create a virtual machines, you need to dedicate these cores, the processing powers into different machines, and that needs to be set up correctly. And in AMD, it's not impossible at all. It's very much possible, and I am running, at least I have run at point 7 to 10 virtual machines in my desktop PC. But yeah, it just took a bit of time for me to do the research and set it up to begin with. But yeah, as you said, I mean, yeah, you've mentioned all the important components: processor, motherboard. These are the first two that I would start with, and then there is the RAM, and then hard drive, and then all of the things that you mentioned. I think the peripherals are also quite important. Which one of the things that we take for granted is when we buy a laptop, we kind of the webcam and the microphone is kind of given. So it will be there. So I mean, this is one of the things that I did when I bought all the components for my desktop PC. I bought everything and set everything up, and then I turned on, and then I thought, oh, okay, let me call someone on Zoom, and then I realized, hey, I don't have a webcam or microphone because it's so much for granted that you didn't
Yes,
think
yes.
about it. But yeah, you have to buy a separate webcam and also a microphone, or maybe the monitor will have a integrated microphone with it, or even actually if you buy the dedicated computer monitors nowadays, it usually also comes with a webcam or a microphone, but you have to be aware of it. Yeah, and other peripherals include a Wi-Fi adapter or a root.
Yes. I had that experience.
Mhm.
So if your PC is sitting very far away from the router, say on a different floor, and you can't get a Ethernet cable,
Mm.
then from your router to your PC, then you would need a separate adapter, and that was a good experience I had. So I have a desktop, I have an adapter for that as well. Yes,
Yes, so these peripherals are
and
quite
and one
important.
more Bluetooth adapter,
Ah, yes, yes, yes. So luckily, my
motherboard.
casing itself had integrated Bluetooth
Okay,
adapter in it.
yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. These are some of the important things to think about. In laptop, that's the benefit of a laptop. That all the essential things that we've now come become used to. They are all integrated in a laptop. But when you are thinking of getting a desktop, yeah, you have to think about all of these additional peripheral devices that go with it.
Yes, yes. I mean, I had the same thing, and it's actually quite interesting, right? I mean, we are talking about building something from scratch. With a laptop, everything is built. You can customize it online. So if you go to a Dell website or a Lenovo website, you can actually customize what camera, what processor, what hard drive. But they build everything and they give it to you. And then if you want to change it, you have to unscrew it, and sometimes it voids the warranty.
Yes.
So you cannot replace everything. I mean, of course you can, but of course it will void the warranty.
Hmm.
So what you tend to do is you just stick with it and you don't do much. So like I have a Dell Latitude laptop and I wanted to upgrade the RAM. So what I did is I bought some extra RAM and then I checked how to upgrade it online, and then I saw that it's a very easy process. But of course I had to make sure that I had the right RAM for my machine, because they'll come in different formats. So it has to you have to get it right. So anyway, so yes, so with a PC you have the ability to customize every single thing. I think that's the difference between Android users and iOS users. With Android
Yeah.
users, you want the ability to customize every single thing on your smartphone. But with iOS, you can still do customization, but not to the extent on which you can do with Android. You can sideload apps. You can even if that app is not available on the Play Store, you can install it. You can do so many things. You can crack the OS. You can install your own version on the hardware. So there's so many crazy things you can do, and I've done it on my smartphone as well. but of course it'll void your warranty. So please be careful before you do any of these things. With a PC, again, because of the ability to customize, uh, and you rightly said, we have to be very careful of which components work with what other components. And I think you mentioned a website recently when you wanted to design your PC. Can you mention the name of that
Yes,
website?
yes, absolutely. Yeah, I was actually waiting to mention it because this website was a game changer. That was it was really helpful. It's called PCPartsPicker.com. We'll obviously add the links to it in the description. But yeah, it's such a helpful website where you can actually pick. Say for example, you only know which processor you want. You choose the processor, it will tell you all the motherboards that are compatible with that processor, all the casing, including every single other things that goes, that is compatible with each of these components. You'll be able to see it, you'll be able to build it, you'll be able to, save that build and share it with your friends, and your friends can then, using that link, go and edit it for you. I mean, maybe you have someone, an expert friend, who will help you decide which components are going to be the best. So it's really good website, and then it also gives you links to where you can buy these parts, right on that list. So of course, those are affiliate links, and that's how they make money. But it is, they really provide really good value, and I would very much recommend, if you are building a PC, definitely go to this website, PCPartsPicker.com. And yeah, I mean, for me, I knew which processor I wanted, and but then I wasn't very much sure about the motherboard. I mean, I motherboard usually, because it's one of the core parts to building a PC, but it's not one of the, like, the cool parts. Like, you want to talk about, how cool your graphics card, how advanced your graphics card is, but not many people talks about motherboard.
Yes.
Although it's the main essential part that holds everything together. So I actually had less knowledge and understanding of which motherboard would be the best, and I all I knew was the bus speed, and based on the bus speed. But that's not the only thing you want to look for when you are choosing the motherboard. You want to see what other integrated features are there, and whether it can take different kind of hard drives. Nowadays there is a new hard drive called NVMe hard drive, and maybe you want that hard drive, and for that your motherboard needs to have that capability to install that hard drive in it. So there are various things to consider for that kind of motherboard, and I knew which processor I wanted to go with. But then when I went to that website, it gave me a list of all the motherboards that are compatible with that processor. So I mean, that made my life so much easier, and I got to choose from that list. So I didn't have to completely get lost in all the different models of motherboards that are out there. And then once you choose the motherboard, then there are other things, like for example the casing. I mean, obviously a lot of people are wants to spend some money on a good looking casing with lights and other sort of bells and whistles in it.
Yes.
For me, I'm more of a functional guy. I mean, for me, I have no bearing or no interest in how it looks, as long as it brings the functional value. I mean, it's really, it has a lot of features and that kind of things in it. So I was not very interested in how the casing looks, but I just wanted to get the cheapest one which is compatible with everything. And for that, there's so many different kind of casings in the market from different vendors, and with so many features and cool things. And I didn't want to spend time on looking for casing. I just wanted the most basic casing, but that will go with the motherboard and fit all the hard drives I want to install and things like that. And it gave me the best one. I didn't have to spend more than a minute on the casing because
Yeah.
of this. So yeah, absolutely. I'm there might be more websites like that, but it definitely is a good idea to take help from such a website to ensure compatibility of all of these different components that you're going to put together.
Yeah, I think yeah, that's quite helpful because even I was looking at that website the other day and it's quite useful because the moment you enter the processor name, it'll list you all the compatible parts. So moving on, I mean, we know what a processor is. Processor is something that takes input and gives you an output based on certain calculations. So you tell it, give me the result of 1 multiplied by 2, it'll give you the output 2, but you send it to the processor, it calculates, it gives you the output. So that's what a processor does. Now the processor has to take inputs and give outputs to other parts. So like a hard disk, a graphics card, and the RAM. So it has to connect to a motherboard. So the motherboard is like a network of roads which are connected to the different parts of the city. And you can say the high street is where the processor is, and from the high street you go to your leisure center, you go to your schools, you go to your hospitals, and that layout is defined on the motherboard. So when we talk about RAM memory, so you store your files in hard disk, but you don't do all the performance or the calculation from your hard disk directly. You first load it into the RAM, which is the memory, and there all the calculations get performed. And RAM is actually much faster than hard disk. And when I say faster, it means read and write speeds. How quickly can you write to the hard disk? How quickly can you read from the hard disk? So whatever the speeds are for a hard disk, it's much faster for a RAM or a memory, as they call it. So, so suppose you want to load Adobe Photoshop. So when you start Photoshop, it gets loaded into the RAM, and that's why people talk about having more RAM because the application sizes are now increasing. Adobe Photoshop may be 3 GB, so you need at least 4 GB RAM to load the whole software. Otherwise, what happens is you can still work, but what happens is it gets loaded onto a hard disk. So what the computer does is it creates a space in your hard disk. It treats that as memory, but because the speed is slow, your performance reduces. So that's why you want to have high speed memory where you can quickly load and offload applications that you want to play with, like games, like video editing softwares, photo editing softwares, which are very high memory intensive because you have to load the whole application. So you have the RAM and the hard disk. Hard disk for storage, memory for running the application.
So,
Then
so just one thing to add here, Amit, as well. I mean, since we're talking about memory, we also have to talk about the cache memory that is situated in the
yes,
motherboard.
yes,
So there are like three levels of memory. As you said, the second and third level is the RAM and the hard drive. But the cache memory, which is a very small amount of memory, now I mean before like 10 years ago, it used to be a few kilobytes, 64 kilobytes, and that used to be the cutting edge. But nowadays you have like cache memory as high as maybe 16 megabyte or 32 megabytes even. But this is the most like fastest
yes,
memory that the processor has access to, and it's not even so. This is actually physically located closer to the processor in the motherboard. When you connect, where you place the processor, it is the fastest accessible memory where the operating system keeps the most frequently used information there.
yes,
And it's even because you don't want to waste time, going through the roads in the motherboard. The It's physically located closest to the processor, and the fastest technology of memory to be able to like get the information in a snap the quickest. And then once that part, once the cache memory is filled up, then it goes to the next level, which is the RAM, and then it goes to the next level once
yes,
that.
yes. You're right. I think cache is the fastest memory. Yeah, and I mean, I have a very beautiful example which I use quite often when I have to explain cache to people. So suppose you go to a library and you ask the librarian, I want a book, and the librarian gives you that book. Say it's a Harry Potter book, and you issue it, and then you read it for some time, and you return the book back to the library. The librarian keeps it and he puts it back to the bookshelf. Now someone else comes and he or she also requests for the same book. Now the librarian thinks every time someone asks me for this book, and this book seems to be quite I mean, a lot in demand, I have to go back to the bookshelf and fetch the book, and so I waste some time fetching the book, returning
Mhm.
the book to the bookshelf. What if I keep the book with me, where I
Mhm.
am sitting in my reception desk? So I don't have to now go back all the way to the bookshelf to retrieve the book. The book is with me. If someone comes, I just give it directly from my reception desk. So that is cache. So instead of storing everything in your storage, you load something close, and something that's repeatedly accessed and something that is heavy. So something
Mhm.
like an image, you cache it. Something like an instruction that you use repeatedly, you cache that, and that's why it's those repeated requests that are cached, and it makes the request seems very fast. So you're still getting requesting for Harry Potter, but now you can issue the book quite quickly because you don't have to go to the bookshelf and come back. So I give this example to explain to people how caching, what caching means. So yes, rightly pointed. So you have the processor, you have the level 1, 2, 3
Yeah.
cache, and yet then you have the RAM and the hard disk. So this talks about the storage and how you access the different files on your machine. And then you have graphics card. So now why graphics card is important? So these days what is happening is we have a lot of UI intensive applications. Say for example a video game. A game has a lot of graphical content, so there are a lot of uh, I mean, what do you say, polygons or pixels, and they have to be connected, and they have to be, and we have to calculate how the image should change from the previous image. And the way it's done is, you have all the pixels and there is a physics engine defined. Say suppose I shoot someone, how that person or how that object should respond to the bullet. So there is there is a physics rule involved. So where you say, okay, whenever I hit something object, say if it's a concrete or a glass, then it should behave this way. So you define the physics. So that's the physics engine. Then you have the rendering engine. How what should I display? How big should be the size of the image? How many frames per second should I display, etc., etc. All these things. So instead of asking the processor to do all that, you off you offload all that calculation to a graphics card. So graphics card does all the calculation, and only for these images, only for the graphical user interface, the GUI part, they take care, but not the regular Windows stuff. The regular Windows stuff, the processor can still take care, but the memory intensive, like a video game or say video editing, photo editing, that's where the
Yeah.
the graphics card comes into picture. So now you have all the main things. You have the motherboard, processor, the RAM, the hard disk, and the graphic card. Now, what else do you need? So the main thing now you need is power supply. So power supply is very important. So based on the wattage of all the components on in your machine, and plus an estimated wattage of how much extra wattage you might need when say you connect a monitor, you connect a keyboard, you connect a mouse, you connect a a Wi-Fi adapter, etc., etc. You connect a webcam. So based on all that, you would have to calculate a wattage. So normally you go for a 600, 650, 800, or even 1000 watt power socket, power supply unit, PSU as it's called.
Mhm.
And once you decide that that box will power your entire system or your computer, and that box will have a small fan to cool it. So it'll constantly run, and that's the slight noise that you get. If you have a sensitive mic, it'll pick up the fan noise even though your human ears can't hear it. So now you have that fan. But suppose you are running games quite a lot, so your PC tends to get quite hot. So then you would need extra fans for cooling, and that's where you would look at, okay, do the fans make a lot of noise? How do they look, etc., etc. And when you were talking about the cabinets, Renat, that's where
Mhm.
gamers come, because gamers want a fancy cabinet. Not just gamers, but sometimes even desktop users want a fancy cabinet with those neon lighting, RGB lighting, and whenever the fan kicks in, the RGB light changes the color, etc., etc.
Yeah.
and the different parts of the machine has a different RGB setting, so you can look at which are the components. Suppose you have a very fancy Nvidia graphics card, then you want to highlight that. So yes,
Hmm.
so so yes, the fan, the power supply unit, and then comes the cabinet. Now cabinet,
Right.
think of a cabinet as a briefcase or a suitcase or a
Hmm.
bag. So they come in different forms. So there are different form factors, but essentially it's the same thing. It encapsulates everything inside it. So it stores the motherboard, hard disk, RAM, everything inside it, and it gives it a place to lock, to screw, so you can move the box and pick it. So it's like similarly putting everything in a suitcase. So you pack all your clothes, put it in the suitcase, lock it, and then everything in the suitcase you can move from one location to another, and then you unlock, and then you can take all that stuff out. In this case we don't take the stuff out, but you have a briefcase, a suitcase, cabin bag, a check-in bag, different sizes. So similarly, cabinets come in different form factors. You can have a small form factor or a big form factor, and based on that, it'll tell you whether you can have a small graphics card or you can put a big graphics card. So yeah, that covers the gamut of the PC.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The casing, I mean, cabinet or casing of the PC is actually, yeah. I mean, now that you mention, it, I realize it is actually quite important, and some thought you need to put in some thought into it when you are deciding what to buy. So, for example, I when I set up mine, I had some old external hard drives. Now I knew that I'm gonna, which I'm not going to use the external hard drives like it is now, but I'm going to break it down and take the hard drives inside and use that as some additional storage in my PC. So I had two of these, and then I also bought, the main hard drive that I'm going to use for the desktop PC. So I ended up with three different hard drives, and the casing has to accommodate all these
Yes.
three hard drives. That And then, if you want to put a, really extravagant graphics card, it also is bigger in size and it would need its own cooling system. So you need to know that the casing is big enough to accommodate that. And also based on the casing, you might need, liquid cooling system for your processor, and then that needs to match with the casing size that you're buying. So yeah, casing is actually quite important, and obviously it encases the whole of your system. So all of these things are needs to come together, and the casing, I would say, go, if there is option, go towards the bigger size of casing. So in future, if you, that's one of the biggest benefits of having a desktop PC over a laptop, is that in future, in 2 years time, you can go through an upgrade without having to throw away the whole thing. You can
Yes.
upgrade the RAM, you can upgrade the graphics card all separately and to your choice. So the casing will enable you to do that. If you buy too small of a case, too compact, and then 2 years time, a new very awesome graphics card comes in with all of these awesome, cool bells and whistles, but your casing is not big enough to accommodate that, then obviously then either you have to replace the casing, which means you have to break apart every single thing that you have, or you just have to settle with a less cool graphics card, or if you might want to add another hard drive in future. If, even that, your casing needs to be able to have that, place to put your additional hard drive in. So yeah, it's very important to actually know which casing you want. Rule of thumb, I would advise just go with the bigger size.
Yeah.
The biggest size that you can. I mean, obviously, you have to also think about your room space and where you're gonna put the PC. But yeah, I mean, however much your room or your desktop table would allow, get the biggest size. And also, you were mentioning about the power supply, the PSU unit, and just wanted to add a little bit on that as well. I mean, obviously, you can do all the calculation of all the different components it's going to power, and then add it all up and know that how much power, how what's the power supply you need. But obviously, you want to add, quite a bit extra. Like for example, I added, and mine came up to be about 600 watts, but I bought a 850 watt PSU unit because in future if I wanted to add something else or replace a component in my computer, then I can then I'm not going to be in trouble and my power supply unit will still be able to handle it. And also you don't want to max out the power supply anyway. I mean, if you need 650 watt and you bought 650 watt, you will always be at its highest full power, and that's not the best ideal way to run a PC. It will always be
Yes.
too hot and stuff like that. So you should always buy, give plenty of room. So if you get 200 watts extra, because you're gonna add other things that you haven't thought about, keyboard, mouse, of course, and then the webcam, and then you if you want to add an additional speaker, okay, speaker might get power from the main power supply, but it would still be having the connection, the electronic connection with it. So that's all of these small things add up, and it's very important that you make sure that your power supply unit can accommodate all of these things and comfortably accommodate. So would very much urge the audience to definitely you know this is an investment that is important investment to buy extra power when you are buying your power, choosing your power supply unit.
Yeah, because I upgraded my power supply unit from 600 to 800. My CPU went kaput. It just suddenly burst, and then I realized my PSU actually burst because I think there was a huge surge in power demand and it could not cope. So I ordered a new CPU PSU. Now again, because my cabinet was small, I had to look at the size and I had to get the same size of PCU but with a higher wattage. So again, if you have a bigger cabinet, then it gives you that flexibility. But sometimes bigger may not be better, so it all depends on what you want to build and what your components are, because the different form factors are there for a reason because it suits different needs. Some people like it small, some people like it big, fancy, other thing. The other thing is cabling. So when you have all these components, you have to connect them with cables, and the cable management is also important because that also dictates how the heating gets dissipated, how the airflow is happening inside the cabinet. So if you manage your cables neatly, the airflow is good, the systems are cooled nicely. But if you just randomly put the cables in and just chuck it in without putting cable ties, then it doesn't improve the airflow, and it's very difficult to see which component is where. And when you have to remove a component, you have to remove everything, so it's important.
Yes.
Plus you can stack horizontally or vertically. You have racks for hard drives, so it also depends on how easy you want to install or remove a component from a motherboard or this. And cooling, I mean, we talked about cooling for the whole system. Also the graphic card separately, or even the processor can run as high as 80 to 90 degrees Celsius, which is quite hot. So you need to put a like a cooler, air cooled or liquid cooled device, so that it keeps the processor cool. And and then once you, I mean, we talked about power supply, but remember, USB devices get their power supply from the USB socket. So the moment you connect some USB device, it actually runs on the power from that USB port, and also um, I mean, the data transfer also takes place from the same port. So you're talking about power and data from a single port. That's why it becomes so popular. So you can, so the moment you connect a USB webcam, a USB Wi-Fi adapter, your smartphone, your mouse, your keyboard, to multiple USB ports, they start consuming power. So that's why the wattage is quite important. Otherwise, you can either damage your peripherals, you can damage your system, because if it's running on a low wattage, then it'll not be able to run to its maximum potential.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, Yeah, I mean, yeah, finding out the right combination and permutation between all of these things are very important. And yeah, as you mentioned, your example, what you've experienced is the perfect example that you might think the casing is the least important part when you are building a PC, but no, actually, that's what made you adapt to a smaller sized power supply unit. And then if you weren't bound by it, then you probably would have done something completely different. So yeah, I mean, each of these parts has has its own importance. And definitely, try to, whenever these parts that you think are less important, try to um, choose one that is very accommodating. So when you're trying to update the more important things like graphics card or hard drive, you're not restricted by these smaller parts. Speaking of hard drives, actually, I wanted to add a bit more on hard drives and different types of hard drives
Yes.
there are. So yeah, I mean, all of these components has different types, and you've explained the different processor and motherboard, etc. But with hard drives, it is interesting because there is one type of hard drive that has been there. That technology has been there for 20 years, and when I was a kid, I think even before I was a teenager, I started taking apart my computer at home. And I was asking my mom and dad to buy me another hard drive which is more powerful. And at that time, the hard drives were had the magnetic discs with the RPM, 5200 or
Yeah.
7600 RPM.
Yes.
And even nowadays, after all these years, decades, that technology still exists. That kind of hard drive still exists. But now there are newer, better technology as well, also. So before there were ID hard drive, I can't remember. There were magnetic discs,
So
which is
those
still
are
available.
traditional HDDs, and now you have
Yes,
SSDs.
hard disk drives. And then you have the SATA kinds as well, which is a little bit faster than the traditional ones. And then, right, while I was building my PC, that was about 2 years ago, so it is still quite new technology, is the NVMe kind of hard drive. So that's like flash drive. Like, that doesn't even look like any other kind of hard drive.
Yeah.
That looks like a chipboard, and that gets installed directly into your motherboard. And that's what I purchased when I was building my desk. And I was like, wow, this is really cool because this is connecting directly to the motherboard. So the speed, there is no a lot of speed being wasted in different connection types and things like that. And the thing looks like a chipboard, and it's like flash drive. So the fastest kind of way to store information is that, and
And
it's
no
so
moving
much fun.
parts.
Yes,
No
no
moving
move.
parts, so no noise. So the hard disk doesn't make a lot of noise, and it's a very small form factor. So as you mentioned, it's like a chip. So a chip on a
Mhm.
card, and which you put it in a slot. So yeah, it's the data transfer is high, the noise is less, it doesn't heat that much, so
Mhm.
long lasting,
Yes, so
fast.
I would very much recommend. Obviously, this that as a result, it's the most expensive type. But I would recommend, if you are building your own PC, maybe no, depending on your budget, you might wanna, you might be able to afford only a small storage, like maybe 500 gig of this kind of storage, the NVMe. But I would still recommend that for your C drive. That's what I did. I have a 2 terabyte of this NVMe hard drive for my C drive, and then I have an 8 terabyte like D drive, which
Wow.
is the old style. So I mean, I can see the difference. If I open C drive, it just opens up. If I double click on D drive, it takes good 1 or 2 seconds to even open up. So the difference of two hard drive performances are like really noticeable.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it's very much worth it to get this NVMe hard drive, even if it is less, like even if it is 256 GB, just get it for your C drive. So all of your application and anything you're running is on that. And then spend an additional spend on an additional hard drive, which can be a slower hard drive where you can store all of your content. So all of your movies, videos, and pictures, images, and everything, you can store it in a traditional type of cheaper hard drive. because it is for storage. And when you want to use it, say for example, if you're doing a video editing with a particular set of video and images, you copy them back into C drive, and then you open up your video editing software, and it's all powerful, like things happening straight away. um, but yeah, I mean, I would very much advise to get the NVMe or the fastest hard drive for your C drive, and then get a massive hard drive, cheaper, for storage of other content.
Yeah, I have a similar configuration. It's a 512 gig for uh, the main OS drive, and then a 6 terabyte for the normal stuff. So just for the clarity, for people who don't understand what a C and D drive is, a C drive is nothing but where the operating system is installed, and a D drive is any other drive, including the C drive, where you store all your files. Um, so normally, the thumb rule is put your operating system on one drive and all the other data in all the different drives, because in case your operating system crashes, you can reinstall the operating system without losing all your data. Because what happens normally is, if once your operating system crashes, you have to format the whole drive, and if your data is on that drive, it gets formatted as well, so you lose all the access. So either you store it on cloud using OneDrive or Google Drive, or you put it on a different drive and the data is safe, and you can keep reinstalling or updating or playing with the operating system. So that's a thumb rule. I think we need to talk about the operating system as well, and the motherboard software and BIOS, because
Yes.
whenever we start a computer, so suppose you built everything and you start it, so now you have to install a operating system on top. But in
Mhm.
order for you to install an operating system, the the motherboard comes up with its own kind of a small system. It's called BIOS, or basic input output system. So it gives you the power to control the peripherals, how you want to access, do you want to password protect anything or not, and then which hard drive should load in what order, because sometimes your operating system could be in, say, the NVMe drive or the SATA drive. So you have to tell the motherboard which hard drive to load first. So where to look the
Mhm.
operating system. So it'll first
Boot
look in
order, yes.
that, or does it have to look it in a USB drive? So you have to decide the order in which the motherboard will look for operating systems. So so you have to define that, and you can do that in BIOS. And then of course, when you have to first install the operating system, you have an optical drive like a CD or a DVD, or you use a USB drive, a thumb drive, and you plug it in a USB port, and then you can install Windows, and then you remove it, and then the Windows will run on its own. So I think those are some of the steps as well.
Yeah, it's actually very, it's really good thing you did, Amit, to explain this, because this is actually quite interesting. Because yeah, that's another thing we take for granted in a laptop. When you buy the laptop, you turn it on, and Windows and everything is installed, and you have pre-installed softwares as well. But when it's a desktop computer, you have nothing installed, and it doesn't even know what an operating system is. So you've taken all the time, you've bought all the individual components, and then putting it all together is also quite time consuming, and you have to do a lot of research. You do it, maybe redo it. I had to redo mine because I kept making mistakes, 3 times. But yeah, I mean, eventually, after you built the desk, the main CPU, and then you connect it to your monitor and everything, keyboard, mouse, and then you turn it on. But there is nothing that will happen, because there is no operating system in it to do it. So yeah, I mean, the process, as you mentioned, I'll just some re-summarize it. So you actually, say for example, you want to install Windows. You actually need a different, you go to a different machine, download a Windows 10 installer, because that's what you have. Nowadays, I mean, rather than any earlier version of Windows, presumably you would want Windows 10. Um, Go to Microsoft website, and they will let you download a installer, and that they will let you sort of create a bootable USB or a DVD drive. Or DVD is obviously now too old nowadays. You'll probably get an USB stick, which will let you create a bootable version of the operating system. And then when you turn on the computer, not turn on your machine, you go to your BIOS settings. That's what will come up when there is no operating system, and then there is something called boot order, where you can say that which drive
Yes.
would it load the operating system from, and then you choose, if it is on a USB stick, then you choose the USB as the boot order, the first thing where the computer should look for an operating system, and then it should just the Windows installer should just come up, and then you get to install it in C drive, and after that get get your good old computer, the known Microsoft Windows, when you restart it next time after installing.
Yes, yeah, that's quite useful, and I've done it many times. I've lost so much data, so every time I think I'll take a backup, I forget to take a backup, and then I lose all the data. So I've now started using OneDrive for all the essentials, and everything else for media files and photos and all. I use a separate hard disk, and
Yes.
I keep multiple copies. I think it's important for people to think about all the backup and everything as well, because with a desktop or any other, even laptops, you need to have backups, otherwise you'll lose all your personal data, like your photographs, your videos,
Hmm.
um, anything else, your personal files. For tax purposes, you might have a lot of documents, your bills, all those things. So it's important to keep everything together. And of course, if you have video games, then you lose all that. So make sure that you take necessary backups. So once you have Windows loaded, one thing we missed is we didn't talk about Linux. So it doesn't
Hmm.
matter which operating system you load, the concept still remains the same. You still need to um, load Linux, download maybe Linux on a different machine. You download something called as a ISO file, which is nothing but a copy of a CD or a DVD, and then you copy it to a thumb drive, but you don't copy it directly. You first load the uh, ISO file in in a virtual drive, and we can, I mean, it's a bit complicated, but let's not get into it. So it's a virtual drive, so you load the virtual CD in a virtual drive, and then you copy all the things onto a thumb drive or a USB drive. Make that thumb drive bootable, because just by copying it doesn't mean that the thumb drive will boot. So you have to make that thumb drive bootable, and once that is done, then you can run your Linux. And another thing that we would need to do when we install any operating system is format the hard drive. So normally you would format it in, for Windows it's NTFS, file system format, and then for Linux it would be an uh, 3 ext4, I think, ext4 format. So you will have to format your hard drive so that the file system on which you would install the operating system. So the file system has to be defined first. So I mean, yes, so there you go. I mean, you can now run your PC, you can install games, play games, install your browser, install all the other softwares, and start playing with it.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I mean, I have installed Linux when I was a teenager a long time ago, but recently I don't actually know how the things have changed. But yeah, it's a good idea to cover how it is in Linux as well. Yeah, I mean for me, I kind of self-taught myself all of these when I had my first computer. My parents bought me it, and then I kind of took it apart, and then found out from really like excruciatingly bad experiences when I couldn't turn on my computer and I had to figure out how to fix it.
Yes.
But yeah, it has been really awesome experience to know about all of these things, and how the back end of it works, like the fact that you have something called the BIOS, which is there even if nothing else is there. And maybe not a lot of people knows this, but even before BIOS you also have like a clock inside the motherboard, which is always powered.
By
So
battery.
Yeah, by battery. So, I mean, you're thinking that, when you turn off the motherboard, everything is turned off. But this one clock and this battery is always powered, and it always have this one information, which is the time, the
That's
current
very
time.
important because I realized once the battery drained out and all the dates and everything went to some standard time. So it's not the current time, it's some like 1980s, 90, I can't remember, but some old time. And all the files in my system are showing some random time and date, and I'm like, what just happened? Then I realize it's a BIOS. So it'll still work, but the internal clock is now gone. So you need to have a good battery. The batteries last quite a long time. So yes, it's important to be aware of that as well. But yes,
Yeah, very rarely
self-taught
though.
as well, same.
Yeah, that could happen very rarely though. That the battery runs out because it is designed or built
Yeah,
that way to
couple of
last.
years at least, yes.
Couple of years. I thought it would last for 10, 20 years, right?
No,
Because
no, 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 no. It depends how much you use. If you keep it all on all the time and everything is working, I think it'll drain quickly. But yeah, again, I'm not too sure. It drained out for me, so I had to change it. Then I realized it hard way. Okay, there is a battery actually on the motherboard that you need to replace.
yes, yes. So yeah, motherboard is, yeah, as the name suggests, motherboard it is the glue that holds everything together. It's very important, and a lot of the integrated things, a lot of the things are integrated within the motherboard as well. So it is important to choose the right motherboard. So we've talked about graphics card, talked about hard drives. We didn't talk about RAMs. Is there anything you want to add on?
So RAM is the memory. So we have the DDR memory, which is double dynamic RAM, and it's just technology. So currently, I think it's DDR5 or DDR6 RAM, which is the fastest, and the RAM itself has a speed. So normally, when we talk about a processor, we talk about these processor speed 3.2 gigahertz, 3.4 gigahertz, 2.1 gigahertz. So that's the processor speed. But there are, of course, other things, how many core, how many threads, etc. So similarly, for a RAM, when you want to buy, you will look at not just the size of the RAM, say 64 gig or 32 gig, but also the speed of the RAM, because the speed is what's most important, because that will tell you how far quickly you can access data in a RAM and how quickly you can write data in the RAM. So yes, that's important. When it comes to hard disk, SSD is most preferable. It's faster, it's quieter, and it's more robust because it's less chances of failure because less moving parts. No moving parts actually. So it's a flash drive, and it comes in different form factors. So like Renat mentioned, you have um, hard disk drive, which is the traditional magnetic drives. You have a disk, and then you have a header, and the head reads over the disk. And then you have the SSDs, solid state drives, and now you have even smaller, which is the NVMe format. And you have different connectors, so you can connect the hard disk to a PCI Express slot, or you have a SATA cable or ID cable. So those are the different cables through which you connect a hard disk to your motherboard.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the graphics card. Graphics card, there are mainly two manufacturers, ATI and Nvidia. And Nvidia is most popular, like Intel and AMD. So Intel is more popular. So you have similarly Nvidia and ATI, and Nvidia is more popular. And the graphics card again comes on, fits in the same PCI Express slot. So there are some slots where you put the graphics card, your network card, your other cards. Now bear in mind the graphic cards takes up a lot of space, so sometimes it covers one or two slots. And this has happened with me. I wanted to install a network card, but I couldn't because there was no space. So because my graphic card was blocking two slots, below and above, so I could not use it. So I had three slots, but one slot was used and two other slots were blocked because it was so thick. So it's important, how you build your PC, because sometimes you might buy a component, but then when you plug everything together, it won't fit. So you have to look at everything compatibility wise.
Yes, yes. Looking at the physical real estate is also very important. As you
Very
said, I mean,
important.
I mean, my graphics card also takes up a lot of space, so I had to like be very strategic about which PCI slot do I put it
Yes.
to. So I have other spaces is freed up. And coming back to the RAM again, the physical real estate of RAM is also something that whenever I'm choosing choosing RAMs to buy, I take that into consideration quite a bit, because depending on your motherboard, you might have 4 slots or 2 slots. And obviously it's cheaper to break down the RAM in smaller denominations. Say for example you want 64 gig in total, so you get like 4 16 gig RAMs,
Yes.
and you use up all 4 slots that you have. Or instead, if you had 232 gig and then have two empty, that way you could in future, rather than replacing your existing and throwing away, you could in future just add two of the same kind and double your RAM
Yes.
output. So yeah, I would suggest when you're building it, try and keep some RAM slots empty so you can upgrade it in future. You might not need it, but I think it's worth going for that. Maybe it would be a little bit expensive to buy the higher,
Yeah.
amount of RAM in one go. Like, instead of 16 gig, 232 gig might be a little bit more expensive, or it might not. But the point is that, you should always opt for that, so you take up less space in the motherboard, and then you have more space to upgrade if you want to in future, and you might not need to. And also there is other things to think about as well, like, you might not need more RAM if your processor motherboard doesn't require it. I mean, there is that kind of efficiency compatibility as well that you want to think about. Like for example, if depending on the application you want to run, you might be able to calculate the highest RAM you will ever need to use, because depending on all the other rest of the components, you will probably come to a point where that's just maxed out. Or based on the RAM speed, you might not need you know the other kind, like the processor or motherboard bus speed. It may become, may make the RAM speed limited. Say for example, if your motherboard is only able to communicate, has a bus speed of something, and then there is no point having a higher RAM speed, because it ultimately the data is going to
Yeah,
travel through
that's
the roads of the motherboard. And so yeah, so these are the things to take into account. But yeah, I mean, it is a very exciting thing to do, building your own PC, and you would learn so much in that process. It might take a day or two. I mean, it took me a day or two, but I can imagine, if you are going for complicated without any experience, it might take a week. But in that week, you would learn so much, and planning for it. Obviously the websites like PC Parts Picker, or there are other websites like that. Making sure that you bought the right, components with right compatibility, and then you know having everything together and sitting down and then starting building, that is just such an exciting thing to do. I am jealous of anyone who is going to do it, after this talk, but yeah.
I feel like doing it now. But I think you mentioned it quite correctly. Motherboard is quite important because if your motherboard, the ports, the slots are not the speed at which the RAM is, then there is no point of buying a high speed RAM. And the same problem is with my current motherboard. It's a very old motherboard, and even if I buy a high speed RAM, it's not going to make a big difference because the fastest speed is the speed of the slot on the motherboard. So and I think motherboard, you also need to consider for ports. So motherboard will connect your front and back. So you'll have a couple of USB ports, a mic or a speaker port in the front, and then an Ethernet port, some USB ports, and then your graphic ports to connect the monitors as well. Sometimes the graphic card itself has monitors, so you can connect your monitor directly to the graphic card, or the motherboard itself will have some slots like HDMI or a display adapter. I think that is important because when you consider connecting monitors, you need to also decide which monitor you'll buy and which port does the monitor have, and do you have the compatible port in your motherboard. Otherwise, what will happen is you will have to get a converter like HDMI to display, display to HDMI, HDMI to HDMI, etc., etc. So getting the right cable is important, and I had this problem. I have a laptop and I've connected two monitors, and my laptop doesn't have multiple HDMI ports. So on one monitor is connected on the VGA cable, and the other monitor is connected via display port, and and there is I think another monitor is connected via HDMI. So I'm using three different types of ports for connecting three monitors, not to my laptop, sorry, to my personal computer.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it is important to see all the outlets, the connection outlets you get with your motherboard. I
And
mean, to be honest.
also bear in mind that have some spare USB ports, because you might want to connect a Bluetooth adapter if your motherboard doesn't have inbuilt Bluetooth. You might connect a Wi-Fi adapter if you're not connected to the using the Ethernet to your router, and then you might connect your webcam, and you might connect your phone, mouse, keyboard, etc., etc. So that's one thing. But what I found good is that these days monitors, the monitor itself comes with USB ports. So like I have a Dell monitor, 24-inch monitor. It has about
Mm-hmm.
six USB ports.
Oh.
So, so I've connected that to my laptop. My laptop has like three or four USB ports, but my monitor has six USB ports. I have two monitors, so I've got 12 USB ports. So it's just incredible. I mean, the amount of expansion that you can get just by using monitors. So if you get the right monitor, by the way,
Mhm.
so that's also quite important.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, my motherboard I think it had quite a lot of USB ports, and eight, I think, and I've used up seven of them. I just have one left now. So yeah, it is important. But another thing to think about is, motherboards usually always come with, a very basic, integrated graphics card, because if you didn't install
Yes.
graphics card, it should, your computer should still be able to, power up, and it needs a very basic one. So, and that will have some outlets in it. Now, if you are buying a separate graphics card, which is very likely anyone would do, then do not think that those other graphics card outlets are gonna come into any help, because you can't use both of them.
At the same time, yes. Or you can put
Yes.
you can
So
put two
if you
monitors, and one is connected to the graphic card and one is connected to your normal port on your motherboard. So that way you can still use, but because one is connected to your
no,
graphic
I
card,
don't think.
I think you can connect the monitors, but the problem is when you're playing a game, you would be only get
I
the
don't think.
output based on the graphic card. No, I think you can, because I have done the same. Because how
Okay.
otherwise how would I connect three monitors?
Right, right, right. Okay, because I mean, I when I tried it, it didn't work for some reason. Because I mean, I only have one monitor, and
Yeah.
when I have my, I have when I connected it to my graphics card outlet, it works. But when I connect it to the my motherboard outlet, it doesn't respond.
Maybe because of
So
the because it's a television, I don't know. So it depends on the
could be. I
cable.
mean, it could also need some setup in the motherboard
Yes.
set. Okay, so yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, obviously, if you've done that, then of course it is
I've done
possible.
it.
So,
I have a graphics card and I have my motherboard on which you have the VGA port, HDMI, and then a
mhm.
display. So I have like three different types of ports, and I've connected three monitors to one single CPU.
Right, right, right. Okay, okay. In that case, yeah, of course, then it does work. But
I mean,
okay.
I mean that's the beauty of having a PC, right? You can customize it to whatever extent you want, and you can do. So I had a very, I got this PC, and then it was a ready-made PC. I got it from my office, but then over the years I've customized it. I've changed the PSU, I've upgraded the hard
Mhm.
drives, I have upgraded the RAM, etc., etc. So now it's a decent machine. And then I connected my Wi-Fi adapter because it didn't have. Then on one of the USB ports, I connected a Bluetooth adapter so I can use a wireless mouse. So all those things, and it's yeah, that's the beauty of a PC. You can you can play with it and you can upgrade, downgrade, whatever you want.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Great. I think we've covered a lot, and this was really interesting talk, and took me back, reminiscing of all the times I've built computers, and it is so exciting, and definitely urge audience, viewers, and listeners to sort of, if you are thinking of, maybe buying a laptop for your working from home purposes, consider. instead of a laptop. It is cheaper overall. You will get a lot more processing power, and overall everything is gonna, you can get, next level better, more efficient components than laptop, because obviously in a laptop, some engineer had to like put everything together in a very compact way. But if you're doing it in a desktop, you'll get everything a little bit cheaper. And if you don't need that mobility, if you are permanently located in a place where you can do your computing from, then consider building your own PC, and it's a very satisfying experience. I would recommend it to anyone.
It is, it is. And one last thing before we go, instead of building your own PC, you can just buy a Raspberry Pi and connect everything to it.
Oh yes, yes, that's another exciting thing. That would be another exciting project for the audience as well if they want. So Raspberry Pi is the smallest computer you can buy. I think for like 20 or 30 pounds, and
32,
then
yeah.
yeah, and you can connect all the keyboard, mouse, and and the monitor. I have done that, and they will actually display,
It will work,
and
yes.
you can install like a Windows operating system in it as well, and then you can basically, that's the smallest computer you can buy, and you can even look at media files as well. So yeah, that's another fun project for anyone to look at.
Anyways, so thank you so much, everyone in the audience. I mean, it was quite a fun topic for us to discuss. We came with this topic very last minute, and it was quite exciting because it's something that you take for granted. I mean, a lot of people, we use computers on a regular basis, but we don't know what is inside and what are the different components, how they fit together, how it's all connects. So when you actually build a PC, you understand the different components and you understand more about the PCs. So whenever you face a problem, you can actually troubleshoot what the real cause is. So whenever we talk about cloud computing, and one of the reasons cloud computing actually became popular is because you had PCs that were failing and people didn't want to take care of the maintenance, so they outsourced the problem to someone else, the cloud providers. So the cloud providers also have the same setup like a PC, but in a different form factor, which are meant to run 24/7, 365 days a year without turning on and off. And they should be, you should be able to replace your hard drives without shutting down the whole computer. So they are built in that way. But essentially, they are just computers, customizable, built by these cloud providers, so that you just connect to them remotely like a virtual machine or a remote desktop, and then you play with it. And once you don't need it, you just turn off. So all you need is basically a monitor and a internet connection to connect to it. I mean, so it's important that all the technology that we build is built actually around that small computer.
Yes, yes, it is interesting how things expanded to our current technological advancement that we have around the world. But yeah, this was a good talk. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I hope to see you guys again next week. And pretty soon we're gonna have a guest in our podcast as well. So stay tuned. Watch this space. And yeah, let us know any feedback or any topics that you would like us to cover. And also, yeah, check out our YouTube channels as well. We have links in the Linktree links with this podcast, so for other useful websites and our YouTube links. So yeah, definitely stay in touch, and hope to see you guys next week.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.